What do you think is the biggest unsolved mystery in human history? Story 1. In 1893, British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans purchased some ancient stones with mysterious inscriptions on them at a flea market in Athens. On a later trip to the excavations at Knossos on the island of Crete, he recognized one of the symbols from his stones and began a study of the engraved tablets being uncovered at various sites on the island. He discovered two different systems, which he called Linear A and Linear B. While Linear B was deciphered in the early 1950s, Linear A has still not been deciphered. There's an entire culture of information that predates much of our history, a window into ancient humanity that is simply locked away from us because we don't know how to read it. Archaeologist here, significant progress has been made towards the deciphering of Linear A. I personally believe within the next couple of decades, with the help of AI-based analytics, we'll have the script cracked. What is the methodology for deciphering things like this? I mean, there is no information about whether the symbols represent words or some kind of phonetic transcript. Trial and error, and looking at the structure of contemporary symbols or script from other adjacent civilizations. I think this story highlights the vast amount of information that still remains a mystery to us due to the lack of decipherment. It's fascinating to think about the lost knowledge and insight into ancient cultures that could be revealed if we could only unlock these ancient scripts. Story 2. The monarch butterfly migrates to Mexico and back every year. During the year, there are a full 4 generations of butterflies that live and die during the journey. Upon returning back from Mexico, the butterfly manages to find the same trees its relatives started out at, despite never having been there. This is called epigenetics. The actual way it works, I don't believe is known, but experiments with rats have shown trauma through associating fear with stimulus like scents can be passed down to offspring. Studies on people who survived the Holocaust and their kids showed similar results. DNA is passed from parents to kids, but that isn't everything. Things experienced in life are passed down in some manner for certain things in other ways. It certainly fits the mold for an advantageous feature of natural selection. This is a testament to the intricate and complex mechanisms of nature, and the instinctual knowledge that is passed down through generations. It's amazing to see how the natural world has evolved to adapt and survive, and the journey of the monarch butterfly is an interesting example of this. Story 3. We like to think we understand the universe, and that physics is a well-grounded discipline, and in some ways it is. However, we have no idea what dark matter or dark energy is, and yet we think it makes up 27% and 68% of the universe respectively. Isn't most of physics essentially describing events in a way that allows us to make predictions? But that is a long way from understanding the true nature of anything. Thinking about why anything is the way it is will always give me a feeling of being a little creature just barely scratching the surface of something way bigger, and I'm not even high. People here seem to misunderstand what physics is about. Physics is not philosophy. It's not about why gravity exists. It's about detecting phenomena of the real world that gravity exists. And then, as you said, state axioms and make models of these axioms to make accurate predictions. This means making quantitative descriptions of the observed phenomena. How does gravity change with distance? How does it change when you increase the masses? If the predictions are accurate very often or all the time, you have a good model. If it starts to break down, you found out your model has reached a limit and you need a new one. We don't even know what we don't know, and everything that we do know we could be wrong about. Science is great, but it seems to me that it's less about knowing and understanding than it is about discovering. Story 4. Most of human history is undocumented, and we will never know our entire history as a species. We didn't start recording our history until 5000 BCE. We do know that we shifted to agrarian societies around 10,000 BCE, but beyond that, we have no idea what we were like as a species. We will never know the undocumented parts of our history that spans tens of thousands of years. We are often baffled by the technological progress of our ancient ancestors, like those in Southeast Asia, who must have been masters of the sea to have colonized the variety of islands there, and sailed vast stretches of oceans to land on Australia and New Zealand. What's ironic is we currently have an immense amount of information about our world today and the limited documented history of our early days as a species, but that is only a small fraction of our entire history. Yeah, that trips me out too. When we think of a long time ago, we think like 10,000 BCE, which was a long time ago, but there's like 100,000 years of human history to get to 10,000 BCE. What was happening? There's also some evidence that puts humans as far back as over 1 million years. Mostly, they were just a hunter-gatherer species, so there isn't much history to really tell, or much that has been recorded about them. Humans were relying on instinct for the most part. Story 5. Neither medicine nor science has an answer for what consciousness is, or where it originates. Honestly, this is probably the one that messes with me the most. I have no idea why, but in the last 6 months or so, I will randomly be driving somewhere, to the grocery store, or to pick up my daughter from school, and just have a thought enter my mind that's something along the lines of, why do I even understand that I exist? What would happen if I just stopped acknowledging that I'm a person, that I'm living on this planet, living the life that I am? And it causes me to have literal panic attacks. Occasionally, and tonight was one of those times, I'll lie in bed and wonder to myself if any of this is real, and if I'm going to snap out of what I'm experiencing. My wife, my daughter, my family, my job, my house, and just wake up in a field somewhere or in a lab, only to find that it's just been a construct of my mind. There have been plenty of cases of people who have woken up from sleep, comas, etc., where they knew with full certainty that they had a life and a family that was just taken from them when they finally came to. It scares me to think that what I'm experiencing could be just that, and not real life. The brain and how it powers what we think and experience, real or not, is really a big thing for me in general. Neuroscience is a really interesting field, and the fact that there's still so much that we don't know about the organ that powers how we do literally everything is both amazing and terrifying at the same time. If science and medicine have no answers, perhaps there is another means to understanding consciousness, maybe even one we haven't discovered yet. Only time will tell. Story 6. I've always thought that the Voynich manuscript was very interesting. It's a huge book written in an unknown language or cipher that has never been translated or decoded, with diagrams of plant species that don't exist. There are lots of theories surrounding it, but no definitive answers as to the origins or the content. My favorite theory is that it is an ancient version of a game, not unlike Dungeons & Dragons, and someone was simply inventing fictional things for the purpose of a game. I've always wondered why we don't consider cave paintings to be an ancient form of fictional storytelling. Why do we always assume any form of ancient writing we find is to be taken as fact, and not consider that it could be just a story, or like you said, a game? Do we really think ancient people didn't tell stories or play games? Story 7. Between 1200 and 1150 BCE, most of the civilizations in the eastern Mediterranean region were either greatly depleted or collapsed entirely, bringing an abrupt end to the Bronze Age. These civilizations were massively depopulated. Their palaces and cities were destroyed or abandoned, and some transformed into small isolated village cultures or nomadic herders. The Greek Linear B script was lost, and there is no written record of the following period of Greek history, meaning that Greeks of the time were probably illiterate. This rapid decline affected, to one extent or another, major historical powers like Mycenaean Greece, New Kingdom Egypt, the Hittite Empire, and Assyria, among others, and we don't know why it happened. These were sprawling, thriving civilizations with healthy economies, elaborate trade networks, complex bureaucracy, written language, and large-scale agriculture, and they just died for some reason. There are plenty of theories, of course, but ultimately there's no conclusive evidence that tells the story of how the Bronze Age collapsed into the intermediate period that preceded the Iron Age. Story 8. No one knows exactly who founded Rome or when. All known records of the city's earliest history date from the 5th or 6th century BC at the earliest, which doesn't help the usual foundation date of 753 BC, and all of the foundation myths are exactly that, myths. All we know with any certainty is that Rome was ruled by kings at some point in its early history, but we don't know who founded Rome. If it really was by a Romulus-type figure, or if it was multiple villages that eventually merged into a single town, even with the latter possibility, it's unknown when those communities would have considered themselves as a single town or when they decided to call it Rome. It's likely that they were a mix of different people. There was likely a native tribe on the Tiber who are often called the Latins. They, at some point, seem to have been under the rule of the Etruscans, who may have been descended from a Greek colony. So all that explains where the culture and language comes from. Then, early on, they had an open city thing where they let anyone enter and kidnapped a bunch of women from the Samnites. So they're really a big mix. The legend also says they are the survivors of Troy. That's probably the most realistic explanation. I think the reason it's such a big mystery is that the foundation legend kept getting rewritten over and over again. It's interesting how all of Rome's foundation stories are mere myths. It really does leave a lot to speculation. It's crazy to think that we may never know for certain who founded Rome, or how exactly it came to be the legendary city it is today. Story 9. The disappearance of Aisha Degree. 9-year-old Aisha Degree disappeared from her home in Shelby, North Carolina on Valentine's Day 2000. She went to bed the night before, and when her mother went to wake her up in the morning, Aisha was gone. She was seen walking along Highway 18 at around 4 in the morning. Several passing motorists saw her, and when one turned around and began to approach her, she left the roadside and ran into a wooded area. It was a cold night, and the witness said there was a storm raging when he saw her, but she wasn't wearing a jacket or socks. A year after she vanished, a construction worker found her book bag in a wooded area. It was wrapped in a plastic bag. My theory is Aisha suffered from early onset schizophrenia. Her planning and executive functioning were affected. On the night she went missing, she was acting under a delusion. I need to find something in the night. It's unsafe in my house, etc. She was wearing inadequate clothing for the weather and succumbed to hypothermia. Scavenging animals scattered her remains. This exact thing happened to a coworker of my mother's. Ironically, he was actually a well-respected mental health worker who was a senior in his field, but one day he for some reason decided to stop taking his schizophrenia meds. They found his body in the woods. It was also winter. Story 10. I'm not sure if you'd call this unsolved or frankly even solvable, but there are two trees found in parts of Central America called the Chechen tree and the Chaca tree. The Chechen tree's bark has a poison that is so strong that by just touching the bark or its sap, your skin will begin to numb. The cure to this exact poison lies in its sister tree, the Chaca, and as if that wasn't enough all on its own, they are always found to be right next to each other in nature. There is a Mayan myth that comes with these trees, saying that they are from two brothers that fought each other over the love of a woman, but they ended up killing each other, and the woman died of a heartbreak. One of the brothers was kind and caring, and thus became the Chaca tree. The other brother was cold-hearted and arrogant, and became the Chechen tree. Poisons and cures found in nature are of course a reality in many different instances, but the fact that these trees are right next to each other in nature and provide exactly opposite effects is pretty crazy. Story 11. In India, in the early 2000s, there was a creature called the Monkey Man who was attacking the people living in. People were so terrified of him that they stopped sleeping at night so that they could protect themselves. We still don't know whether it was real or if it was just a rumor that people started believing in. I think about this pretty often, but I've never spoken about it to anyone because I was so sure no one else would remember. I never thought I would see it spoken about here, but I'm glad I'm not the only one who wants to know more about it. It's fascinating to consider how much a rumor could gain so much traction that people were genuinely afraid for their safety, even to the point of altering their sleeping habits. The fact that we still don't know whether the Monkey Man was a real creature or just a figment of people's imaginations just adds to the mystery. Story 12. Imhotep was a super genius in ancient Egypt, around 2700 BC. He was allegedly an amazing physician, the architect of one of the first proto-pyramids, and invented a bunch of stuff. A century after his death, people started worshipping him as the god of medicine, and yet his tomb has never been found. To me, that's fascinating. He must have been given an amazing burial, and if his tomb were ever to be found, we'd probably discover some really cool stuff, but its location is still unknown. I often wonder if he used his giant brain to design or hide his own tomb so well that no looter or archaeologist would ever find it. From what I understand, Imhotep was basically like a Leonardo da Vinci of his era. I wonder how much history is actually just buried in the desert right now, just deep, deep under sand. Most of it. 10 years or so ago, a groundbreaking archaeologist who specializes in satellite footage made an app that allowed regular people to learn how to spot telltale signs of buried structures from satellite pictures. It was a huge success. Unfortunately, something happened. The app got deleted, the site stopped getting updates, and there hasn't been any follow-up. Shame, really. Story 13. Who blew up the Georgia Guidestones? The strangest part is that the government didn't even investigate it either. They just cleaned up the mess and hid any information they found if they were even looking for it at all, which screams government involvement. You would think that if explosives were used to destroy property, that there would be a big investigation, but it just got ignored. Yeah, there was a clear CCTV shot of it exploding, so surely it would have caught said people rigging up the explosives, right? It seems a bit straightforward. Story 14. What happened to all the other human species? Did we kill them? Did they go extinct independently from us? A mix of both? Did we assimilate some to the last individual? Could we have built a civilization together with another human species? Otherwise, where did the universe come from? And did it start with the Big Bang, or was that just something that happened inside a larger universe? Story 15. Did all languages come from a common ancestor or develop independently? The idea that we existed as humans for thousands of years without having developed language boggles the mind, like we were biologically humans with all the intelligence and capability for language as modern humans, yet we didn't speak. What was society like in those times? We had to have had cultures and societal rules, but how did we teach them to younger generations, or pass on any knowledge? I've always wondered what communication was like before spoken language was developed. Did we just sign at each other? Did we write or draw? Did we just grunt like cavemen? It's a big mystery indeed. Story 16. The Zodiac Killer. They only got away with it because it was so long ago. Killers usually don't go very long without getting caught in today's age. I think they have an idea who it was, but it was so long ago now that all the suspects are long dead, so we can't ever really know. This case is the reason I originally made this post. It is my personal biggest interest, and there are more and more rabbit holes yet to be discovered. Arthur Leigh Allen died of cardiac arrest 2 days before the FBI were going to meet with him, and he was later identified by the only surviving victim to see his face as the Zodiac Killer. However, the case remains cold, as this was many years later, and is one of the only serious pieces of evidence that we have. A company called something along the lines of the Case Reopeners strongly believe that they have found who did it, and it was not Arthur Leigh Allen, but this was shut down by Vallejo police, as their evidence showed this was incorrect. I met a woman who worked that case for the FBI. She was not high-ranking nor in charge. We met years after she worked the Zodiac Killer case, and it was obvious she was still upset by the impotence she felt when they continually came up empty-handed. Story 17. An act of mystery in the archaeology world is the exact time frame of when humans made it to the Americas. The date keeps getting pushed back with more controversial discoveries, which then just turn into evidence as they pile up. It's a fascinating story to see unfold. Yeah, I like this one too. I think many of the traces of early settlements are likely submerged. Sea levels were much lower during the Ice Age, and the majority of human settlements are along the coasts, so a huge piece of our history is probably lying on the sea floor, completely undisturbed and possibly well preserved. Underwater archaeology is a huge frontier moving forward. Agreed. Story 18. I haven't seen anyone mention the Indus Valley Script. There was a huge civilization in northern India and Pakistan around 3300 to 1300 BC. It spanned more area than any other civilization at the time. They invented writing independently, something only done 5 or 6 times in history. But to this day, with all the thousands of inscriptions that we have, and all the documented contact with other civilizations, we haven't deciphered their writing. There's no known Rosetta Stone, no known descendant scripts, and no known documentation of the language other than what was written in the Indus Valley Script. But the biggest mystery isn't how to read the script or what it says, but the question of whether we'll be able to ever know. Is it even possible to decipher a language we know absolutely nothing about? Things like this are just crazy to me. An entire vast civilization we know nothing about. That's just wild. And not just any vast civilization, but one that had lots of contact with civilizations we have a good record of. One that's in an area that's still very well populated. And not even just one that had lots of contact with civilizations with an understood historicity, but one that left behind such a rich history and storytelling of their own. We might not ever be able to decipher much, if any, of the history they left to us. Another big mystery related to our current inability to decipher an ancient language. But with modern advancements in technology and artificial intelligence, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to solve at least some of these particular mysteries in the future. Story 19. So I have a personal experience, sort of. My father had a coworker who was a great guy, good at his work, fun to talk to, and nobody had any complaints about him. He lived in an apartment right next to work, so the night watchman at the workplace would see him whenever he went out. One night he went out in his pajamas, talking on his cell phone, and nodded at the watchman. The watchman didn't think much of it. After all, it's not all that weird to take a walk, even though it was quite late. He didn't think much of it. The watchman didn't see him come back, but he figured he missed him when he went on a bathroom break. But the guy didn't show up at work the next day. Someone from work went to check up and he wasn't there. Nothing was disturbed. He was just gone. Everyone thought he had dropped dead, killed by thugs or an accident or some medical condition. The workplace filed a police report, and here is where it gets weird. It turns out the guy had created a fake identity. Any credentials he had given were fake. The references he had given had never heard of him. The family address he'd given didn't exist. The police didn't find anything illegal in the apartment, but they didn't find anything that would give a clue as to who who he was either. We moved away a few years ago, but I don't think the case was ever solved. It's definitely the best unexplained mystery that I've personally come across. Maybe he was a spy. This is what I was thinking. And that phone call he received were his superiors telling him to either get the heck out of Dodge or calling him back to whatever meetup location was agreed upon to discuss a new assignment. Or perhaps a darker outcome was to meet with his handler under the guise of a check-in when really they were just gonna retire him. Story 20. The treasure of the Knights Templar. To this day, it has never been found. Is it true that it exists, or is it just fiction? How can treasures of that magnitude just vanish? The story behind it is fascinating, but is it just that now? A story that is now a part of the history behind the Knights Templar and the treasure doesn't actually exist anymore? Maybe one day someone will find out. Story 21. Why are we born only to suffer and die? We are not born to die. Does a book begin just to finish? Does a song open with a beautiful chord purely to end? Yes, we are born with the inevitable fate of death, but that is merely the final act of the play. We are born to love, be joyous, to move, learn, cry, and feel. We are in fact born to live. Story 22. Children who claim to remember past lives, the details of which upon checking seem to be accurate. Buddhist Rinpoches, spiritual leaders, are chosen using this information. Children younger than 5 tend to talk about their past lives, their house, their village, their particular rooms, and even recite incidents that happened to them, such as losing a dog, falling and getting hurt, and smaller personal things that not everyone would know. Parents take them to these places, and if the villagers see substance, they recognize them as Rinpoches. Reincarnation is considered normal and even essential in some contexts. When my brother was 5, we were driving up the Oregon coast, and as we got closer to Fort Stevens in Astoria to take a break, all of a sudden he started talking like he was a military commander in charge. He was giving orders to people saying, "Put this gun here, that gun there." When we went into the place, there was the name of the guy my brother was speaking as. He had been assigned during World War II. It was crazy and freaky. It never happened again, and he didn't remember it afterwards. Children have some of the most wild and amazing imaginations, so it's hard not to dismiss these claims as simply kids telling stories, but there truly is no way to know for sure. Story 23. I would think the religion/afterlife would qualify here. Nobody alive truly knows for certain what happens after death, if anything does at all. Ironically, every human who is no longer alive knows the answer, if there is anything to know, so it's not really unsolved, but it remains a mystery to the living and probably will for at least another week or two. I'm hoping I'm tripping, and I did not just read this as you planning on leaving us in a week or two. Please don't do that. That particular mystery can wait. Not at all. I just find it curious how a lot of people are super certain and confident that they know what's on the other side, be it paradise, oblivion, reincarnation, or anything else. We all find out one day, and I'm in no rush. I plan on enjoying this life as long as I'm allowed, then finding out the answer to the greatest mystery known to man. My week or two comment at the end was just being silly, kind of like when you've got a crap ton of work to do and say, "Yeah, I'm gonna be here for a minute," type of thing. Story 24. Where did all that rubble go? It is generally believed that the Sphinx had a nose, or even was a hound statue before it was given a makeover. But where did all the rubble go? If the nose broke off, isn't it under the sand? The same goes for the statue of Colossus in the port of Rhodes. If it fell into the sea, then where are the remains? It's believed to be 33 MTS, or 108 feet, incredibly large for that time. It can't have disappeared into thin air. Story 25. Gravity. We know it's there, we can measure it and relate it to mass, but how is it actually creating a force? The bending of space-time due to large mass causes things close enough to orbit around or be pulled towards. Hence, in science class, when you held a tarp and put a weight in the center, the dropped ball on it would orbit it. Not exactly the same, but similar. Yes, but that explains only the effect, not why it occurs at a fundamental level, like we understand electromotive force, for example. The thing I find the most interesting about gravity is that there are parts of the world where it doesn't seem to work exactly like it does in other parts of the world. Perhaps science has an answer that I'm ignorant of, but cars rolling uphill instead of down in certain parts of the world just strikes me as freaky and causes me to question how thoroughly we understand the force we call gravity. Story 26. UFOs and cryptids like Bigfoot. It can't be psychological, especially with events with multiple witnesses. Trained observers, such as military, law enforcement, and so on, are usually considered reliable witnesses. Even various governments have admitted there's something they can't explain. So what the heck are they? I strongly believe Bigfoot exists. If you want to see a quality breakdown of actual evidence, watch the show Les Stroud produces. I always thought that there couldn't be that much hard evidence of its existence until watching that show. Les Stroud is probably the only person I've seen approach the subject with both an open mind and a skeptical eye. He's also spent ungodly amounts of time outdoors, between Survivor Man, other film projects, his classes, and his own free time, and if anyone can be sure that his encounter wasn't just a misidentified wolf or bear, it's him. Story 27. One that I learned from high school history was Roanoke, the first British colony in America. They sent around 100 people there with resources. Then they left to fight a war. When they went to check on them in a few years, they were all gone without a trace. We don't know what their fate was, and I think it's a cool story. They were likely either killed by the Wanchese tribe or assimilated by Chief Monteo's tribe, and migrated after Wanchese's tribe attacked Monteo's. Either way, the colonists never had good options after John White left with Walter Raleigh, and the Spanish-English War picked up in earnest. It was surprisingly common for British colonists to defect to Native American nations during the colonial era. Gross mismanagement in southern colonies and totalitarian theocracy in New England meant that many people there said screw it and went off to stay with the Indians who actually had their crap together. Even colonists who were forcefully captured during the French and Indian Wars were known to refuse to return home once ransomed or paroled. These theories are nice. I'd like to believe that the Roanoke colony was simply assimilated into a kind Native American tribe, but the truth is, we don't know for sure, and we may never know for sure. Story 28. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart. In 1937, she tried to fly around the entire world, and during one of the final legs of her journey, she lost contact with the ship that was going to lead her to the island where she was supposed to land. Why she lost contact has an explanation, and yes, it's obvious that she crashed because she ran out of fuel, but unlike the MH370, they never found any remains of her plane. Nothing. Not a single atom of that plane was ever found. There was a rumor I heard spreading around TikTok and the internet. Did she die to coconut crabs? Story 29. This is probably not the biggest, but I still think it's interesting. Where the heck is the Hanjo Masamune sword? It was smithed by one of the best Japanese swordsmiths called Masamune. It ended up with the Tokugawa family, the ruling family from 1603 to 1867. It is said to be the best Japanese sword, but it went missing after the Meiji Restoration, where the samurai had to give their swords to the American soldiers. It was documented which soldier took which sword, but it seems that in the documentation there was an error with the name of the soldier who took the Hanjo Masamune. The name was written so sloppily that no one could read it, so the best Japanese sword ever created went missing and is still missing to this day. Story 30. There are all sorts of interesting things throughout history that we don't know much about, but one mystery that intrigues me the most takes place in my own head. Something I've always wondered about is dreams. How they can unfold in ways that defy my wildest imaginations, how our subconscious might be picking up details we aren't aware of and piecing it together in strange ways. Sometimes the dream is a coherent story, and sometimes it's really bizarre. It's nothing like the usual thoughts in my head, nor something I would have chosen to dream about. Sometimes in dreams there will be unique locations that I've never seen while conscious. Like one time I saw a particular distinct house in one dream and then revisit the exact same place in another dream years later, seemingly picking up where the last dream left off. The subconscious part of the brain is the biggest mystery to me. Dreams are such an interesting phenomena because some are so lucid and vivid that it feels like it's actually happening in a way that is distinct from your usual imagination or daydreaming. I can imagine flying right now, but I wouldn't feel it. But in a dream, I would feel that same sensation I get on a roller coaster. It's not like we can choose when we have a dream, either. Lots of times, it's just a dreamless sleep, but sometimes our brain might decide to treat us with a dream. It's never really our choice, even when we really wish we could choose our dreams. Dreams have always fascinated me. They don't seem to serve a definitive purpose, and sometimes they seem downright purposeless. They're just another aspect of the human experience that's shrouded in mystery, and I kind of like them that way. Story 31. Our ocean floors. Only 20% have been mapped and explored. Every year we find around 2,000 new species, and the numbers may well exceed that, but those species need to be named and categorized. Who knows what else lurks down there? Probably a leviathan, and thank goodness it's hiding down in the depths, away from our populated coastlines, because I really love swimming in the ocean. Story 32. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The death of the Dyatlov group was an event in which 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959, in uncertain circumstances. Overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite, while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had died by physical trauma. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of these 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, and 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. Numerous theories have been put forward to account for the unexplained deaths, including animal attacks, hypothermia, an avalanche, katabatic winds, infrasound-induced panic, military involvement, or some combination of these factors. This is the Wikipedia explanation. According to me, it could be aliens, because the people who lived down the mountain saw flashing lights in the middle of the night in the sky. The Russian government even tried to close the investigation, refuse the families to take the bodies back to their native country, and force them to be cremated in Russia. There was also a movie on this incident called The Devil's Pass, which I recommend watching. Thank you so much for watching and/or listening all the way to the end. If you have a story similar to these that you'd like to share, please leave it in the comments below. I would love to make a video on those in the future. If you enjoyed your time, please leave a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.